Well, welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Marcy Markusa, and we've got lots to discuss. We also have lots to celebrate today. We're going to hear from a double Juno nominee with roots in Manitoba, so you're going to have to wait for that one because, again, we're going to be starting looking at our relationship with the States. Are you going to still be going down south? I'm Marcy Markusa, as mentioned, and this is Manitoba. Well, if you are still going down south, then let me guess where you're driving. Grand Forks. It's the closest U.S. neighbor, main center to go to. And we're going to start there with the podcast, but not a discussion with you about how you're making decisions about whether to go south or not amid the tensions that are arising between our two nations. But what are they thinking down there about whether or not people are going to be coming, and what are they hearing from Manitobans making those decisions? We're going to talk to someone that is involved in a group that runs campaigns that say things like Canadians put the grand in our forks. On their website, there's a special section with tips for Canadian travelers. But what are the folks over at Visit Greater Grand Forks hearing from Manitobans now that there's tension in the air over tariffs and sovereignty? Julie Rygg is Executive Director of the tourism there, and she's with us on the podcast. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Before we get into the tension, just let's set up the relationship to begin with. I mean, you've been there for a long time working with that group. How close has the relationship been when you think about specifically Manitobans and folks in North Dakota?
Very. I mean, and going both ways. I have to say, every time I take my daughter up to Winnipeg to see the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, she talks about how nice Canadians are and how much she loves it. So I think it's been a wonderful relationship both ways, traveling back and forth. And we've been very fortunate with that. And of course, over the years, as you mentioned, I've been around a while now. We see the travel patterns change depending on political issues, of course, the exchange rate and things like that. So, but we're always optimistic for that relationship to be good, like it typically is. We love our Canadian friends, and we think Manitobans in particular like their North Dakotan friends.
What political issues, before we delve into today, what political issues in the past would have disrupted travel patterns between, our province and North Dakota?
Probably the most significant one was when the Iraq War started. And there was, social media is wonderful, right? But there's a lot of misinformation out there too. So as they say, don't get your news from social media. We'd get some comments that Americans didn't want Canadians here, and there were businesses not allowing Canadians, and it was, the things that we were hearing were completely untrue. And I have never heard from one person in our community that they don't want or don't like Canadian visitors. I think our community in particular really knows the importance of those travelers to our community.
It's interesting because during the Iraq War, I was down there for coverage actually in Grand Forks. We were at I don't know if it's still there. It was like a truck stop right in the highway. I think it's still there, right when you're coming into town. And we were completely welcomed, but you could feel the tension. There were moments where Americans would approach. They knew I was from CBC and from Canada, and they would say, "Why aren't you backing us in this war?" And there would be conversations.
And that's interesting to me because you're the first person I've heard say that.
Yeah. Well, what's it like now, I wonder then? Are you hearing anything now then? What have you been hearing from people on both sides of the border about the current tension and the current climate between the countries?
I've received, I counted this morning 5 emails.
Okay.
From potential Canadian visitors, people that are engaged with us, whether they subscribe to our newsletters or whether they follow us on social media. The emails have been very respectful. They have, of course, concerns about the tariffs and that relationship with Canada. But they've been very respectful, and they realize that our organization is not a political organization. Of course, we keep those comments and we share them with whether it's local, state, federal leadership. We share the input that we're getting, but our organization, of course, is not taking any kind of political stance on this.
Yeah.
But we understand your feelings, and we welcome them as long as they're in a respectful manner. And of course, we go back to social media, and and I've heard from some of my counterparts across the state that there have been some posts that use some profanities and things like that. So unfortunately, we can't take those ones to heart as much as the legitimate, this is my concern, this is why I might not be coming right now.
Do you know if some of the uglier posts on social media are they identifying themselves as Manitobans, or are they coming from,
yes,
they're identifying themselves as Manitobans?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you look at the bottom line, and I would suggest, I would just want to say with the exchange I had with that gentleman over the Iraq War when I was down there, it was one exchange in a whole few days of being there, and I would characterize it as challenging but respectful. When we look at economically, how important are Manitobans to your tourism economy in Grand Forks and Greater Grand Forks?
Very, of course, and right now our occupancy numbers aren't showing a decline. In fact, the last 2 weeks, we've shown an increase. Now, those numbers aren't broken out Canadian versus U.S. travelers, so I can't comment. We watch our occupancy numbers very closely, of course, and that gives us an insight to where we are for the year, where we are for the month, where we are for the week. So we haven't seen the numbers impacted yet. It's still so new. But we definitely will be watching that. And of course, the Canadian dollar right now isn't where we would love it. So that's impacted travel up until now. Of course, we hear that Canadians still come, but they might not be coming quite as often.
Yeah, it's hard to tease that apart. The dollar's at 70 cents this morning. I just checked. We do know at least one school division in Manitoba has said there will be no trips to the United States. I'm just curious. Sometimes we talk about this when we talk about it in the context of individual travelers or families. But when you think about, travel trips either from schools or maybe even hockey tournaments, which are huge, I think, down in Grand Forks, is that something that happens, all the way through the winter months that also supports the economy down there?
We don't see a lot of, I guess I wouldn't say we're seeing a lot of school groups and that kind of group travel. We do work with some of the motor coach companies that bring people down for, shopping days or shopping weekends, things like that. Again, because of the dollar, there's not as many right now. There hadn't been leading up to this. And then, of course, yes, you're right, the hockey tournaments. In fact, we have a tournament coming up in March that is just strictly teams from Manitoba that we work with. So far, I haven't heard of any cancellations, and we haven't heard from our local hockey organizations of, big numbers of cancellations. Of course, though, when you're, sometimes youth sports beats all, right? If our kid has an opportunity to play their sport or be active in whatever their chosen activity is, parents tend to want to support that, which is amazing. And we hope it doesn't impact those youth sport teams. But, again, we just don't know yet.
Just last, I know that you're not speaking politically, but I do want to ask at a personal level, what worries you most about our relationship moving forward?
We just enjoy a great friendship. I have to say, over the years, I've been in this job now 22 years. And I'm not typically the person answering the phone. I obviously work pretty closely with the people who are, and the people that are greeting the guests as they come in. And it's just we don't see Manitobans in Canada as a whole different country. We've got a close relationship, just talking about the weather this morning. It's pretty cold here too. And we have that common bond. And, what worries me, of course, and it has through the years, my job is to bring visitors to our community. So anytime that's impacted, whether it's the exchange rate, whether it's a political issue, whether it's the weather, things get canceled because of the weather. Those are the types of things that all worry me, and how that impacts visitors. Visitors bring a huge economic impact to our community, and we realize that.
Julie, thank you very much for your time live after a cold, long weekend. We'll hear it was a long weekend. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day.
That's Julie Rygg. She's the Executive Director of Tourism at Visit Greater Grand Forks. Well, next, let's continue talking about tensions around the world now because of what U.S. President Donald Trump has been putting out there. And that means taking you inside some of the talks that have been happening about the future of the war in Ukraine. U.S. and Russian officials met in Saudi Arabia to talk about this, how to end the war in Ukraine. Ukraine was not at the table. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke after they took part in that meeting, which lasted about 4.5 hours, we understand. Here's what he said.
We're going to appoint our teams respectively that have worked very quickly to reestablish the functionality of our respective missions in Washington and in Moscow. For us to be able to continue to move down this road, we need to have diplomatic facilities that are operating and functioning normally. The second point is that we're going to appoint a high-level team from our end to help negotiate and work through the end of the conflict in Ukraine in a way that's enduring and acceptable to all the parties engaged.
The thing is, Ukraine is not one of the parties engaged. So let's talk about that. In Winnipeg, members of our local Ukrainian community, like Nick Krawetz, share in some skepticism about what this is all going to mean moving forward. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So just overall to start, what's your overarching feeling about the fact that Ukraine's not at the table?
Well, I think it's incredibly offensive and naive to not have the victim of Russian aggression at the table and having discussions being talked about, basically about them behind their back and without their involvement is completely unacceptable. This is the mood in Ukraine. This is the prevailing narrative that there's a fear that Ukraine is going to be sidelined here and a deal is going to be done just for the sake of having a deal quick and dirty and not respecting Ukraine's agency or voice.
What is the greatest fear about the land?
Well, right now, about 20% of Ukraine's sovereign territory is occupied. This is a huge chunk of land in the scope of European geography. Millions of people are currently occupied. And, this is Ukraine's sovereign territory that has been legally acknowledged and recognized by the international world, including United States and Russia back in 1994 when Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in return for sovereignty and security. And now that deal has been torn up and Ukraine has been fighting to try to save its sovereignty and independence basically ever since this war started in 2014.
What did you make of, Donald Trump talking about his initial meeting with Vladimir Zelensky and then Zelensky coming out of that meeting and saying, that the discussion came about the amount of aid that the U.S. has already, put forward to Ukraine. And Zelensky says to sort of back that up, quote unquote, this is Donald Trump's language, insurance on what they've spent. That he's talking about giving up some of the rights to the minerals and such and what Ukraine has to offer. What's your sense of that sitting here watching that?
I think that is also incredibly offensive to have, again, a victim of war and aggression being forced at its most vulnerable point to even discuss giving up its natural resources and critical minerals in contingents of aid. That message that sends around the world should be frightening every single country who's next to a large neighbor, including our own. And just to set the record straight in terms of how much aid has the Americans given Ukraine, the vast majority of that aid has actually been given to the Americans themselves in their own defense industries within the United States. So the European Union has certainly is the single largest donor to Ukraine in terms of actually money and arms to Ukraine.
Vladimir Zelensky, while we're still talking about the president of Ukraine, is saying that they will not accept anything, that is negotiated here at a table that they're not part of or sitting at. What is your sense of how he's handling this?
Yeah, I believe that's the right approach for sure, and it just gives an impetus too that the unity of the democratic world in Ukraine, Canada, Europe, We saw yesterday European leaders meet in Paris to decide sort of a game plan moving forward from these comments and policy signals from the Trump administration. And it is very worrisome, and I think they're rightly worried in Europe as well, because a wider war that goes beyond Ukraine's borders will come to Europe. It will come to the Baltics. It will come to Poland. It will come to other countries. And they know that if the United States can no longer be the guarantor security provider in the world, they are under tremendous threat because their armies are outnumbered and outmanned as well. So the message, I think, in the Ukrainian capital and European capitals is that we must remain united at all costs and not give in to this divisive and provocative rhetoric coming from Washington.
Although I would say that for people that haven't, and I love your sense of this, obviously, it's leading to a question, but I was reading the outcome and the analysis of the meeting yesterday, and nothing clear came out of it in terms of a stance about how to deal with this moving forward. They couldn't come on the same page around, what backing Ukraine looks like moving forward and what they do, given, what's coming out of the United States. You sound hopeful still this morning, but I wonder what your reaction is to the fact that there wasn't a clear message coming out of the European leaders.
I think there will be in the coming days for sure. We saw the British Prime Minister's comments about his readiness to put troops into Ukraine to enforce any sort of peace deal. That was sort of unheard of, a few years ago. So again, as this threat evolves, as Putin becomes more emboldened by Trump, making concessions already, major concessions, I'll add, before negotiations have even begun, should we be worrying everybody? And I think the Europeans are going to really rally around supporting Ukraine.
Just last, Nick, what do you hear from your family in Ukraine right now? And maybe also from others in our local community, but I'm especially interested in people on the ground in Ukraine as they're watching all this happening in the world.
Well, to be honest, what they tell us is that they cannot even believe what's happening. This is sort of a second nightmare for them, really, with playing out, because this rhetoric is just so bizarre that the United States would take these positions. And, my family has been greatly impacted by this war. They've been internally displaced. My brother-in-law is a part of a volunteer brigade that has to go to the front lines on a daily or weekly basis, delivering aid and, food supplies and hand warmers and, you name it. My 9-year-old nephew has to go to school with 2 backpacks, one for his school supplies and one for a survival kit. It has his blood type and, non-perishable food items in case his school or playground or gym class gets bombed by a missile or a drone attack coming from Russia. So, the situation is incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly sad that my family and millions of Ukrainians have to be put through this daily ordeal and anguish, watching what's flying over their head. But meanwhile, they're watching on their phones and, what's happening across the news wire. And, their fate and their future of their lives are being decided by people who have no idea what they're talking about or have never been to Ukraine, and they've never been to the front line to see for themselves what's really going on in eastern and southern Ukraine.
Nick, thank you very much for this. And obviously, unfortunately, we're going to be talking again. So thank you very much for your time on CBC and your perspective.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's Nick Krawetz. He's a member of Winnipeg's Ukrainian community. Well, as I mentioned, right at the top of the podcast, we were going to take you somewhere a little bit different today. There's a lot of serious news to make sense of, so we always want to do that first for you here on This is Manitoba. But we also have something to celebrate, a lot, in fact. The Juno nominations came out, and next on the podcast, we're going to hear from Sebastian Gaskin. He was nominated for not only one Juno nomination, but for 2, and these are his first 2 Juno nods. His song Brown Man earned him the nomination for Contemporary Indigenous Artist of the Year. He's also up for Recording Engineer of the Year for his song Ghost. He's based in Toronto now, but he grew up in Manitoba on Tataskweyak Cree Nation. And here's a conversation I had with him about the Juno nominations.
Hey, Marcy, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you feeling about the Juno nods?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just such an honor to be included amongst such incredible artists and creators. And to be recognized by the Canadian music industry at large is just such a great honor.
What does it mean specifically to be recognized for a song such as Brown Man, which is just, when I listen to that, I mean, you can hear the emotion in your voice when you're performing that.
Yeah, well, like the song was put out to sort of spark a conversation around, the how it feels to exist as a person of color, as an Indigenous person in Canada, and how that can be dangerous, at times. And it's the fact that it's getting recognized at a national level is kind of mind blowing.
When you were, putting the tune together, when you were writing, performing, did you know that you had something not only poignant, important, but musically special on your hands?
I think so. Before I wrote this song, I had never really written something such as politically charged as this song. A lot of the music I wrote before this was very like relationship based, like a lot of like stuff about breakups and about like new relationships and stuff like that. Kind of just like sultry sort of songs. So this was definitely a bit of a turning point for me in my sort of songwriting journey. Yeah, I think once I finished writing it, I think I had a moment where I was like, wow, like there's something here.
Yeah, that song for folks that don't know the actual inspiration, where you first sort of the nugget of it came from. It came after George Floyd's death, right?
That's right. Yeah, it was all over social media. There was that awful video going around, and it was all over the news. And it was I kind of just reached a breaking point. I couldn't look at it anymore, and I just had to write about it and get these thoughts out onto paper.
Have you heard from maybe family, friends, fans back in Tataskweyak since you've been nominated for the 2 Junos?
Yeah, I think a few of our leaders are going to try and make it out to the Junos. I know my mom is definitely going to come out and support, so I'm pretty excited to see her out there in Vancouver.
What did it mean to you when you passed by that billboard? I know that you were back in community last year, I think, and then you saw it. You're Tataskweyak, home of Sebastian Gaskin. What did it mean to you to see that?
Oh my goodness, I was absolutely blown away, and actually when I first went back to Split Lake, the billboard wasn't up yet, and it was this sort of big secret, and they didn't tell me so I was invited up back for a youth conference, and they didn't tell me until after my performance, and they're like, hey, maybe you want to go for a ride on the highway and see what we put up out there. And so when I went to go see it, I was just like speechless, like what do you say to that? It was just such an incredible feeling to be embraced by the community that brought you up.
Do you have a sense of what your success has had, the impact of your success and what that has meant to your community in Tataskweyak Cree Nation?
I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I try not to think about that stuff because it feels like a lot of pressure sometimes, but I hope that I can inspire at least one kid, one youth from Split Lake to chase their dreams, or whether that's music or sports or even higher education. Like I hope that my journey can help inspire at least one or two.
Well, obviously it will, and it has. I remember even being up in, not in your community, but in Garden Hill for some work we were doing with CBC. And there was a young person there that said, their whole life was changed because they had, for them, they had a rapper come to community and kind of give a talk with youth. And they said all of a sudden they sort of started thinking about themselves in different lights. So the impact can be really that direct. When you think of yourself growing up in Tataskweyak, what was the role of music? And how young were you when that was sort of you're finding that as your creative outlet?
So my friend Dieter Beardy and Jamie Morris, Bobby Beardy, they used to jam at the high school gym, and they used to be in this band called Septic Mind. And I think I must have been like 7 or 8 or something, just being so like enamored with the thought of jamming with a band. And they graciously invited me out and allowed me to like wail on the drum kit, and so having that early exposure to being a part of that sort of musical community, I think sparked this flame you see today.
Do you know yet if you'll be able to be performing at all in the Juno lineup this year?
No, I can't speak on that so far.
Okay. So there might be a secret there, I'm sensing, but I'm not sure. What's next for you? What are you working on right now?
So I have my debut album coming out on February 21st. It's called Love Child. It's the sort of culmination of the past 6-7 years or so. and it's gone through a couple different iterations, to get to this point. So I'm really, really excited to share this final product with everybody, because it's been such a journey getting here.
And can people expect on Love Child more tunes that are personal, or are you going back to some of your roots writing from experiences? You said you don't often write politically, is what I should have said, but obviously Brown Man is political. So what can they expect from the new album?
Yeah, this is very much just like an audio diary. Lots of love songs. There's a couple dance songs on there. As some people may know, I have a couple dance songs out, but yeah, it's sort of just this this journey of a soundtrack to my life, sort of thing,
I asked you obviously about the Juno nominations around Brown Man we talked a lot about, but I haven't asked you about what it means to you to be up for Recording Engineer of the Year. And I just, as a radio person, I just really feel like we should spend a minute on that. What's that like for you to have that honor specifically?
Yeah, so that nomination is going to Hill Korkudis. She did an incredible job working on my song Ghost. That was also co-produced by Hill and another producer called Justin Melly out here in Toronto. Just to be surrounded by such incredible creatives, it's like it really takes a village to put out a project and to put out music sort of at this level.
Well, good luck at the Junos. We'll all be watching and rooting for you. And thank you so much for your time with us here talking to Manitoba.
Thank you, Marcy. All the best.
Well, good luck to Sebastian Gaskin, a first-time Juno-nominated musician from Tataskweyak Cree Nation here in Manitoba. And we can't have a podcast called This is Manitoba and talk Juno nods without congratulating all the other local nominees from our province. And so these are the other nominees with Manitoba roots. They are Boy Golden, Jocelyn Gould, James Ennis, Big Dave McLean, The Secret Beach, as well as Jordan St. Cyr. So we'll see what happens at the 2025 Juno Awards. I'm Marcy Markusa. Thank you so much for tuning into This is Manitoba and the pod today. And if you enjoyed what you heard or you felt it was valuable, don't forget to like and share.